James K. Baxter was a poet who very much um, admired people who didn't stay within boundaries or live conventional lives. He very much, his own life reflected this. He was an unconventional character who didn't conform to the normal expectations of society. And so this poem is in praise of a tomcat who, um, in James K. Baxter's eyes, is an animal that follows instinct and doesn't necessarily abide by the rules that the rest of us perhaps live by. He starts off talking about how the tomcat cuts across zones of the respectable through fences, walls, following other routes, his own. So, in other words, he follows his own pathway. He's not restricted by boundaries. He is not fenced in. And maybe it's possible that this is kind of an analogy for Baxter's own life because he was a very unconventional character who, as I said earlier, doesn't live his own life by the rules that of suburbia. This is reflected straight away in the structure of the poem. It doesn't follow any poetic rules. There's no rhyme. And he uses enjambment so that one line just flows into the next line, much as in the same way that a tomcat would wander from one garden to another. In a couple of the lines of the poem, like this one, the sad whiskered skull mouth, which I'm just highlighting at the moment, and the scruffier ash black coat, they're not particularly lovable qualities, but to Baxter, these are the things that make the cat lovable. The fact that it's not a pretty creature. It's described with a skull mouth. We have some alliteration there. The sad whiskered skull mouth. Scruffier ash black coat. He's not painting a pretty picture of this cat, but this makes it all the more attractive to Baxter because it's reflecting, it's unconventional. It doesn't worry about appearance. Even the fact that the cat is complaining, it requires Baxter to get up and go through the bush at 4 p.m. to pick him up. These become admirable qualities to Baxter. He says he has no dignity, thank God. So he's expressing his delight in the fact that the tomcat is a problematical character. The third stanza in particular paints a interesting picture of the cat. For example, he uses alliteration where he talks of badges of bouts and fights, where he talks about the scars that the cat has. He describes him as having a snake head. He's an old samurai. These metaphors paint a picture of this feisty, difficult creature who does as he pleases, beholden to no one, gets in fights. The bit at the end where it talks about his tight furred scrotum drives him into wars. The only thing that dictates to this cat what he should do is his desire to find female cats. Other than that, he doesn't abide by any rules. And again, this makes him something enjoyable to Baxter. He enjoys the wildness of the tomcat. Yeah, his sense of freedom is again reflected by the way that the cat lodges in cellars. I mean, he doesn't go home at night necessarily. So he cuts across zones of the respectable. He doesn't follow pathways. He sleeps where he feels like. None of the normal rules of society apply to this cat. He follows his sex drive. He's a free spirit. He does as he pleases. There's a contrast created between people who abide by rules and people who don't. He describes the people who abide by rules as the respectable, but there's a kind of sarcastic tone to that. Their lives are divided into zones. They have fences, they have walls, they have gardens. Um, and whereas in this case, the tomcat, he doesn't abide by any of that. He follows other routes, his own. Qualities that we would normally associate with positivity, they're inverted in this poem. It's not normally in modern society someone who goes out and picks fights and ends up covered in scars would not normally be considered to be an admirable person, whereas the tomcat in his case, these show his wildness, his refusal to bow down to rules. So his snake head is seamed on top with rough scars, which are leftovers from the battles that he's been in with other cats, and likewise the sporting one or two flowers like round stars, badges of bouts and fights. I mean, these are badges of honour that this cat carries with him that reflect the way that he's gone his own way. Um, it's interesting that he uses a metaphor to describe the life of the tomcat, that his sex drive gets him into wars. So he is probably engaged in fights for territory. So rather than being bound by walls and fences, he actually is in a constant struggle to establish, to kind of invade other people's territory as he sees fit. Overall, this poem is almost like James Baxter's homage to freedom and wildness, and it forms a strong contrast to another poem that he's written called The Ballad of Calvary Street, where Baxter mocks the kind of people who are bound by the rules of the church, get married, live unhappy lives, but stay together because that's what the rules tell them they must do. And as this is more of an admiration of a creature that is separate from all that. It could almost be taken, as I mentioned earlier. It has parallels to Baxter's own life. I mean, he um, lived quite a wild life, died extremely young, and really lived very unconventionally. So perhaps he sees something of himself in the tomcat, someone who lives life as he sees fit and doesn't abide by the rules that are put in place by other people.